Hi everyone. So on Wikipedia, there is a tool you can look at. It's in the top right-hand corner. If you click it, it says current events. So you can get a little snapshot of what's going on in the world. It sort of uses a collection of different news sources. There's been a coup d'etat in Gabon, and no doubt the Wagner Group will have had its hands somewhere on that. I'd be surprised if they didn't, with their nefarious activities in West Africa. Even with Prigozhin dead, the group isn't gone. I think there's been a replacement. So that's probably one of the big stories today. But I was looking at recent deaths, and Joe the Plumber has died. Um, if you follow American politics in any way, this name will ring a bell. Joe the Plumber, whose real name was Samuel Joseph Wurzelbacher, was an American man who became famous during the 2008 presidential election for his critique of Obama's economic policy, and he then became a quite a prominent conservative activist. Throughout that campaign, and that was a big campaign that year. You know, it was a big election. John McCain, Sarah Palin, both utilised his sort of populism, and he was very much presented as very much the frustrated middle America type figure. He was presented as a normal American guy, you know, the bloke next door. I was skeptical of that then, and looking at his biography, I think reiterates that he was not a normal individual. I think he was an extremist, and I'm just going to read out some things from his article that I think exemplify this. Now, people might say, "Oh, don't speak ill of the dead." I disagree. I think that so long as you're talking in a candid way and it's not kind of a crass way, you're not dancing over someone's grave. I think it is legitimate to talk about someone's legacy when they've passed away. I mean, if not when they've passed away, then when? As long as it isn't sort of, too crude or triumphalist, I think it's totally legitimate. He was 49 years old. He died of cancer. Of course, that is what it is. It's sad when someone dies before the time, but I'm more interested in Joe the Plumber as a public figure because I think he personified a very unpleasant aspect of American society. And, I'm not anti American. I've come across many Americans I like very much, but I'm going to read out some of his controversies. This is from Wikipedia. Any information that's wrong, this is the source, so, people can feel free to correct this. By the way, his economic critique of Obama, I think that's pretty normal. A lot of conservatives would have disagreed with the Democratic president, so I don't think that's particularly noteworthy in this context. Rather, I'm talking about his views on other things, so just bear with me. Now, the reason I'm talking about him is because he did become a public figure, so, I don't think Wurzelbacher voted for Donald Trump in 2016. Surprise, surprise. Um, Again, it's his right as it's his democratic right. I'm not saying otherwise, but I believe he ran for office himself. Actually, plumbing credentials regarding his statement to Barack Obama about intending to buy the plumbing firm that employed him, where tobacco later said the graduate buying company his interview 6 years prior. Court records show that Wurzelbacher made $40,000 in 2006 as part of the background in McCain's use of Joe the Plumber during the 2008 campaign. Several media outlets researched his professional plumbing credentials. One Toledo Blade article said Mr. Wurzelbacher said he works under Al Newell's license, but according to Ohio building regulations, he must maintain his own license to do plumbing work. And the article continues. I'm not going to read out the whole thing, but basically it's questionable if he even was a plumber in the strict sense of the word. Tax controversy. ABC News reported in October 2008 that there was judgment lien against lien, I'm not sure what that means, it must be a legal term, against Wurzelbacher for non-payment of $1,182 in owed Ohio state income tax dating to January 2007. I mean, that's small fry compared to Trump's scandals, but still potential tax evasion. Database search controversy. Prior to the 2008 election, an employee of Ohio's Department of Job and Family Services, at the behest of its director, Helen Jones Kelly, used state computers to search for information on Joe Wurzelbacher On November 2008, the employee reported the violation to the State Inspector General. State and other officials completed an investigation into Jones Kelly's order, concluding that the searches were improper. Well, that sounds like that's against him. It's quite a lengthy article. But these are the ones that strike me, and I want to talk a little bit about. In June 2012, so this was the same year as that year's presidential election, Wurzelbacher's election campaign released a video in which he said the implementation of gun control resulted in Europe's Jews being unable to defend themselves during the Holocaust, explaining in 1939 Germany established gun control. From 1939 to 1945, 6 million Jews and 7 million others unable to defend themselves were exterminated. Now, this is a very common tactic of the gun lobby, and in my view, it's very, very cynical and manipulative. Before I continue this, the point is totalitarian regimes restrict control in every way. So, of course, gun control is going to be part of that, but they restrict freedom of speech, they restrict everything else, which, incidentally, I would argue the gun lobby want to do to their critics, restrict freedom of speech. Because as soon as someone advocates gun control, they immediately suggest that they don't have a right to do so. So, for all the Second Amendment people go on about their rights, what about the First Amendment? In the same video, Wurzelbacher said that the implementation of gun control by the Ottoman Empire in 1911 resulted in Armenians being unable to defend themselves during the Armenian genocide. Interesting, he didn't mention the Rwandan genocide, where there was endemic violence, predominantly by Hutu extremists. The video drew sharp criticism from the National Jewish Democratic Council and Ohio Democratic Party Chairman Chris Redfern. Wurzelbacher subsequently defended the video, stating different countries around the world have tried to disarm their citizens and then have them exterminate their now unarmed citizens. The manipulative thing about this is it ignores the fact there are many democracies. This is the thing that really irritates me about the gun lobby, their distortion. There are many democracies. Britain, Japan, and Australia are three prominent examples that have tough gun control measures by popular consent. And it's not a case of disarming citizens, it's the fact that most citizens aren't armed in the first place. This just isn't the same gun culture. So this is what the gun lobby do. They sort of use this on-arming citizens lies, quite frankly. Lies in the sense that, for years they said Obama's going to take away your firearms. And every time the notion of common sense gun control is mentioned, the gun lobby scaremonger. They say they're coming to take your guns, yet the vast majority of law-abiding Americans can keep their firearms. So it's a lie, it's scaremongering. And then he continued, unfortunately, there are a lot of whiners out there. Wurzelbacher's spokesman, Phil Cristofanelli, also defended the video, stating that Wurzelbacher was a student of history who knows that the Founding Fathers understood what the Second Amendment was always the people's last defence against tyrannical governments. If he was such a student of history, he would know that the Second Amendment also said a well-regulated militia, and the Second Amendment was drafted in the 1780s. Very different society from America in the 21st century. And, I'm not saying the Second Amendment wasn't an important part of the Constitution. It was, but I do think Second Amendment extremists routinely distort the situation in other countries. Illegal immigration remark. In August 2012, Wurzelbacher drew criticism for a comment he made about illegal immigration. During the campaign rally for Arizona State Senator Lori Klein, Wurzelbacher said, "For years I've said, put a damn fence on the border, go into Mexico and start shooting." When asked about the comment later, he said he did not care about being politically incorrect. Klein defended Wurzelbacher, telling reporters his comments were just a joke. Well, it's all very well saying it's just a joke, but this is it's a very serious issue. And, I'm not someone who's naively liberal on this, because we have similar issues in Europe regarding illegal immigration. I'm somewhere in the middle with that. I think every country has a right to control its borders, so it's not so much that he's against that, but to actually advocate shooting people, that's not dissimilar to what Katie Hopkins, our very own right-wing mouthpiece, came out with in this country, calling migrants, and I quote, cockroaches. I think you could take a hard line on immigration, illegal immigration, without advocating violence. in that sense, especially when a lot of people who are crossing illegally are desperate people. Now, they are doing it illegally, but it would do for a conservative activist to put himself in someone else's shoes for once. And this is why I feel a lot of conservative activists just lack empathy. They lack human compassion. And this, perhaps, is the most disgusting of all. And this absolutely shames Wurzelbacher, in my view. Reaction to the Isla Vista mass shooting. In an open letter to the parents of victims who died in the 2014 Isla Vista killings, I believe this is the one with the so-called incel who killed, I believe it was a dozen people in, I think it was California, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was a well-publicized mass shooting at the time. Wurzelbacher wrote of his right to protect my family, stating that as harsh as this sounds, your dead kids trump my constitutional rights. We still have the right to bear arms. Any feelings you have towards my rights being taken away from me, lose those. Well, this points to the stupidity of Wurzelbacher, the fact that he was going to have his firearms, which I assume were illegally purchased, taken away because of calls for more common sense gun legislation. That has three sources, that piece. NBC News, the Huffington Post, and Salon. So they say don't speak ill of the dead, but I can imagine those grieving parents who just lost their children in a massacre. This, frankly, asshole comes out and says that. That's absolutely disgusting. But I'm also not surprised. I'm not at all surprised because that is the sort of mentality of gun extremists in America. Very selfish mentality, but also a very detached mentality because calls for common sense gun control legislation is not about taking away individuals' legally purchased firearms. Um, every time this has been proposed, there has been not a single example of any sort of mass government agenda or campaign to take away legally purchased firearms. It just hasn't. It's just typical of the scaremongering of the gun lobby. So, quite frankly, people could say this guy was a conservative hero or whatever. I think he was an extremist. And the reason I'm talking about him is because, frankly, I think a lot of right wing Americans have a similar mindset. It's me, me, me. And it's just this sort of a mentality of, especially when it comes to guns, is extreme paranoia. Um, and it's disgusting. My brother and his family recently returned from the United States. I won't go into the details for obvious reasons, but suffice to say, they were recently involved in what could have been a mass shooting. Now, thankfully, in the end, it didn't turn out to be an active shooter situation. Rather, it was two guys who got into a heated dispute and one of them pulled out a gun. But who knows? Being America, the security services couldn't take any chances. And this happened in a shopping mall. The entire mall had to go into lockdown as a result. Thankfully, there were no injuries or deaths on this occasion. But my 12-year-old niece, had to go into hiding. She was separated from her parents. Thankfully, their friends were with her. But this is what happened. And, I thank God that they're back in the UK now. Whenever I heard about shootings in schools in the state that they were in, I got concerned. So I've never had much respect for pro gun extremists in America. I think that they are. I think they're extremists, and it's this religion of the Second Amendment. It's so fundamentalist. It's so deranged, quite frankly, deranged. Sylvester Stallone has said an interesting thing, or he took an interesting position. In some ways, he's sometimes considered a conservative actor. There's not many in Hollywood, but he's sometimes considered more of a conservative based on some of his economic positions. But apparently, he had a close friend killed in a shooting, and my respect for Stallone increased after this. He said, and this isn't verbatim, but he basically pointed out how insanely stupid America's gun culture is and how it doesn't need to be that way. It doesn't need to be as bad as it is. Um, So, this is one conservative public figure who is not crazy about guns. And I just don't know how you can have a situation where there's so much gun violence and to say that guns are not the problem. To me, that is utterly deranged. It's detached from reality. So I'm talking here about Joe the Plumber, but I think it personifies a wider mentality in America. This is not to say that I'm a lefty. I have no time for the woke left. I think they're divisive and detached in their own way. Um, Maybe in my next video, I'll be talking about that polarization in America. But when I read this, it's like Alex Jones harassing the survivors of mass shootings. It's absolutely disgusting and cowardly, absolutely cowardly. For Wurzelbacher and others to say me, when they're grieving families, even if he had said, my heart goes out to them, or given some sort of ounce of sympathy, but said, I believe in the Second Amendment, he couldn't even do that. Assuming that quote is accurate, it's absolutely disgusting, and in my view, shames his legacy. Um, So that's how I will remember Joe the Plumber, a reactionary right wing extremist, a reactionary gun extremist. Um, and he's not the only one. There's a lot of conservatives in the states that are like that. Now, to be fair, there are conservatives who are more moderate and who are not gun fanatics. So I'm not suggesting that all American conservatives are of that persuasion, but many are. Um, and it's this siege mentality. It's like, let's stock up the firearms because the wicked communist government's going to take our guns. It's detached from reality. And quite frankly, I'm surprised that there hasn't yet been another Oklahoma City or another Waco cult type situation. I think it's very plausible in America. I think America's in a very bad way right now. And I think it's extremes. I think in this video I'll be talking about the hard right, but there is, left wing equivalents. Anyway, I'll wrap this up. But, I don't really care if supporters of Joe the Plumber flame me with angry comments. I'll leave the comments open, but I don't really give a damn because I think the safety of American children, the safety of American citizens for that matter, matters a hell of a lot more than insecure people who literally cling to their firearms. Insecure, paranoid, detached individuals who are just they seem to think the right to bear arms matters more than public safety. It sickens me, to be quite honest. And as much as I think there's many great things about America, it's a great country. Um, this is one thing that would stop me living there. I just think it makes me very, very uneasy. I think it's a very, very negative thing. This obsession with guns.